Good afternoon, everybody. We are just waiting to admit everybody who's in the waiting room. So give us a couple of seconds and we'll start pretty soon. This is worse than watching the bathroom scale because I'm looking at the numbers of the people in the room and I'm thinking, is it going up? Is it going up? Is it going up? This time it's actually a case of please go up, please go up. That analogy worked better in my head than when I said it. Okay, but yeah, there we go. 14. Welcome. Oaks. There you go. My computer has just said 15:02, so I am going to get the show on the road. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Teresa Lee. I am one of the IABC Africa board members, and today it's my privilege to host this webinar with two people that are going to explain to us about why it's time for change to change. Just before we get going with the introductions and the real meat of the session, I'm going to ask you to please double check that your microphone is on mute. And then if you have questions, please, please, please pop them in the chat box. It'll be nice also if you just tell us who you are, just write in the chat box. I am so and so from this and this company, and I'm based in that city. So it'll be great to see where everybody's from and get an idea of the room. Yes, so that's awesome, fantastic. So let me not waste any more time, and I am going to immediately start to introduce our two speakers. Yep, first off, we have a speaker who is boldly known for declaring that change management is an oxymoron. And he should know because he has spent 25 years helping leaders steer massive organizational shifts, getting wiser and more distinguished, aka grayer, with every transformation. Kevin Liebenberg is the CEO of Actuate, the strategic change management consultancy behind the wonderfully human idea of half logic, half magic. He calls himself a white space worker, which to me means that has a very elegant way of saying that he thrives where rules aren't written yet. Kevin is also an award-winning change and communication specialist, strategist, storyteller, TEDx speaker, Breathe, and the convener of Forum, a homegrown speakeasy for leaders passionate about change, communication, and organizational development. Kevin, it's good to have you with us today. Thank you.
Right,
Then,
thanks.
sharing the online platform with Kevin today is Justin Balaski. He has made his life's work to make complex organizational change feel a lot less complicated. Justin is the founder of Idea Leap, a consultancy that helps organizations adopt modern, adaptive, lean, agile approaches to change. He has trained and certified more than 1,000 people worldwide in lean change management and has coached executives and teams to build lasting capability. In other words, if change had a global support hotline, Justin would be the guy answering the call. He joins us from Vancouver, Canada, where, ladies and gentlemen, it is very, very early in the morning. Justin, I hope you have a strong coffee on hand and that you're wearing a cape today because I think you're a superhero. Welcome,
Thank you.
Justin.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to start this conversation by asking each of them to give us a short intro explaining how they got where they are today in terms of their beliefs of corporate transformation. Kevin, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for the warm welcome. I would not believe everything that Teresa said, um, but thank you. I didn't know who you were describing there. I was wondering who the speaker was. Anyway, um, so I studied communications and politics, and it turns out those are really great ingredients for what I do now in my work, mostly in large corporates. And uh, after varsity, I worked as a salesman selling nuts and bolts for the South Africans on the call. It's a pre-packaged hardware brand called Eureka, brown and orange packets for any of the DIY people. And I used to
Okay.
drive all across South Africa from Sunny's Hof to Zeerust and beyond to sell these things to hardware stores, both small and large. And I guess I mentioned that because I realized there how sales and relationships go together. And I think a lot of what we do in change is in some way kind of building relationships with people of trust so that they're willing to kind of go on the journey with you as hopefully a guide or a steward. I then spent 10 years, well, I spent a bit of time in the UK as well. I was a call center agent working in London, inbound sales. It was actually a great job, and I developed a lot of empathy. A lot of the work we've done subsequently has been in contact center environments, and it's good to have done the job that you kind of dealing with people who are in. And then I ended up in 10 years in Nedbank working in banking, completely against everyone's expectations, including my own. But had a great time and worked both in marketing, in hardcore operations, and then in group HR, actually, in a leadership development environment. And I mention that because I guess what we do at Actuate combines all three of those aspects. There's a marketing aspect, there's an understanding of how an operational environment works, and then obviously there's the people and culture piece that goes over that. So that in a nutshell is how I got to be here. I've been running Actuate for the last 16 years with my amazing team. And yeah, we've gone from our base in Joburg and ended up working in nearly 25 countries. And we've actually just concluded a 12-month program in Saudi Arabia, which was probably the most challenging as well as most rewarding project of my life. With my colleague and I, Itu and I spent a lot of time there eating a lot of lamb. So that's me. Thanks for having me, Teresa.
Thank you, Kevin. Justin.
I didn't know that about you, Kevin. We have a bit of a similar background there. I spent years in like outdoor sporting goods industry and sales and actually global brand management at one point. Worked for the world's largest scuba diving equipment manufacturer, traveled the world, went diving in South Africa, all over Asia. It was the dream job. But at one point, I decided to go back to school. So I went back to graduate school and did an MBA, and that's when I learned about change management for the first time, actually. And I thought, man, that's the future. That's what I'm gonna zero in on. And so, I got a job somehow with no experience, like MBA, I guess, and at a government agency, and I immediately regretted my decision because I went from this world of talking to people and building relationships and all that to here's your Excel sheets and spending all day long entering line items and analysis of the analysis. It just felt like a waste of time. So I started taking some lessons I learned from brand management and marketing and sales and going and talking to people in new ways and dropping the Excel sheet and picking up the sticky notes. And all of a sudden things started to work. I also took some learnings I learned I started out in lean, so lean process improvement and that kind of stuff, where you try to remove waste from the process, and that stuff started to work. And then I thought maybe I do have a future here if I can just do that. So I started, I realized I couldn't handle the internal place. I went into consulting. I started trying to make a name for myself in the sort of lean agile space because I thought this was the future. And in the early days, I remember when I was talking to recruiters, they're like, okay, listen, when you go into the session, don't talk about lean anything, just ad card, ProSci ad card. That's what they want to hear. And so it was weird in the first few years. And then now here we are years later. I've worked in many different companies all over the world, done lots of training and stuff, and people now pay to learn the stuff. So, it's funny how the world turns, and here we are. But the roots of it, I believe, were in that, to your point, it's a people business, and sales and marketing, and I mean, heck, serving tables, all these things are really, really good entry points into change management. So I'm sure most people on this call all came from different backgrounds as well. So that's a little bit about me. And ideally, yeah, I guess I should mention that. Founded Ideally, and it's only been about 2019. And really the idea was that I wanted to talk about change differently. And I started drawing cartoons. And if you follow Ideally on LinkedIn or stuff, you might have seen them. And I just literally draw all the cartoons you see, I just draw of things that I'm experiencing or seeing. A lot of it is poking fun at how we do change and corporate environments. And a lot of it is trying to talk about new ways of doing change, right? And that really, really just took off and grew a big following. And then I guess here we are today. So that's a little bit about me. Teresa, thank you for having me.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Justin. Yeah, I think the one thing about humans is we want to laugh. Even if it's a very serious situation, we need that relief. So, Kevin, I'm going to go back to you now, and I'm going to ask you, since you're so outspoken about not calling it change management, any suggestions on what we should call it?
Yeah, so that idea is not mine. I just quote it liberally, and I stand by it, being change management being an oxymoron. I think unless it's something very simple and sort of process or admin related, managing change, I think, in its very language, is a little bit obnoxious and presumptuous, because I don't think, especially when it gets complex and system wide, when it starts talking to all parts of an ecosystem, I think the best we can aim for is change coherence, which is my preference, or perhaps something like change alignment. And hopefully Justin talks later about the difference between agreement and alignment. So that's, I guess, what we're aiming for. And what we've found in terms of a methodology of how we do that is we then have replaced management with marketing. So we talk about change marketing. And our view is, if we take the marketing process, and just like you would either build a brand or sell a product or service, you would start by looking at your audiences, segmenting them, gaining deep empathy and understanding for where they were at, and then work out how you were going to approach them and what the message is that you'd approach them with, and how you would hopefully be able to influence or persuade them to change rather than forcing it. So I guess in summary, there's two ways to drive change. One is through force, which perhaps works in the short term and for something that might be quite tactical. But certainly for the bigger scale change, which is what excites us at Actuate and what I've been very intrigued by for a couple of decades now, is I think persuasion is going to win every day of the week.
Yes, Kevin, a very good friend of mine, whom I see is also on this call, actually taught me that when all else fails, feed them. So that's part of the cohesion, I think, that you try to get to, is just give them something to eat, and then they'll focus on the change later.
Yeah. And talk to them while you're feeding them.
Yeah, exactly,
Then
exactly.
half the battle's won, indeed.
So, Justin, Kevin actually did throw the ball over to your court when he mentioned alignment. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've always talked about, we get agreement and alignment mixed up a lot, right? And I feel like in change, and I agree with everything Kevin said there. When we get stuck as change folks and I don't like the manager term much either. I found that's sort of a losing battle in a lot of organizations, but it's out there. But I agree with it. We can't. The reality is, you can't fundamentally to chase an agreement is what I call an anti-pattern, right? So I always talk about change, anti-patterns, and patterns. Anti-patterns are things we often do because we think it's the right thing to do, but they more often than not have a negative outcome. Patterns are things that we do that more often than not have a positive outcome. And chasing agreement over alignment I'm going to share here. I'll just share things as we go. Here's one of my anti-pattern cards for my Hexi change kit that I illustrate this with. It gets you sucked down. It gets you sucked down the whirlpools, right? You will never get everybody to like change. Some people just won't Alice. Some people will come at different times, and that's okay. Right. And so what's more important is that they're aligned to the change. And the difference for me is being, look, you can't expect everybody to like everything. Alignment means that we share a sense of direction and we'll support it, even if we don't necessarily exactly like it. Like many times I've seen we replace a system for call center is a good example. But and what happens is the change team goes in there and says, oh, here's what sucks about what you do today. Here's what's good about what you're going to do tomorrow. But for people who are attached to that old system, they like it. And so we already alienate them a little bit to that. Instead, we go with a message saying, look, we know you like your system. Nothing we're going to say about this new technology is going to get you there maybe right now because you have to live it, right? You have to do it. But here's why it's important. And because it's not going to be a supported system and security or whatever. And then they go, okay, well, let's make the change. We don't want, if they had a choice, they would keep their old system, right? So my whole thing has always been stop focusing on agreement, start focusing on alignment first. If agreement comes out of that, hey, we love this, awesome, great. If not, you don't like it, I understand. Do you agree with it? Are you aligned to it? Yeah, I'm aligned, or no, I'm not aligned. That's a personal decision. And so that's sort of been my approach. And I just shared in the chat box as well the world's simplest change framework that kind of supports this notion that what is change about? You talk to people. Do they like the change? Great. If not, are they aligned to the change? Yes, great. If not, do they have the context of the change? Yes. Okay, then you've done your job. You've given them the context. They understand. If not, you talk to them some more, right? So I agree. You can't force people. This is a personal decision. Our only role is to make sure that those decisions are made with the right context, which is where I think change marketing and I never really seen anybody else globally do this, like Kevin and his team are. But also sort of a tip of the hat to the communications world in helping to set and create context. It's incredibly important to get people there.
So Justin, you've actually touched on a point that's a sore one for me. The concept of change marketing, which is what Kevin uses. So, Kevin, I am again going to challenge you on that. And please explain to me again why you call it marketing, whereas communication implies two people talking and understanding and getting to agreement. Whereas in my mind, marketing is, here's my product, buy it, use it. So I'm ready.
So you're entitled to your opinion, Teresa, even if it's wrong. We talk of it as marketing in the context of the fact that the way I see marketing is behavior change. And I think any good change process drives some kind of behavior change, right? Otherwise, why would you be doing it? And at its simplest term, and let's take it to the example you gave, Teresa, about selling something. So, what you're trying to do at the simplest term in marketing, a fabric washing solution. You can hear I don't do the washing or the grocery shopping, but we want you to switch from surf to Omo, and therefore there's a method of doing that. There's some messaging that does that. There's certain touch points or interventions that you put in place, and if you do that well, then you're able to drive people to make a new choice. And the best marketing, if we elevate it to something that can change the world, that can make the world a better place, or some of the truly great brands in the world, what they are able to do through this marketing process is change the story running in your head. And that is the hardest thing to do. And if you can do that at scale in a large organization or even in a country, because I do think change marketing at a country level is also very relevant and possible. And, some of the best countries are able to do that and some of the worst are not. That's why we talk of it as marketing, because we want to change behavior. And to change behavior, we need to change the story. And to change the story, we follow a marketing process to really understand the people we're trying to talk to. Meet them where they're at, be empathetic to what the situation is they're in. And to Justin's point, we talk of doing what we do in the beginning of our process as research, but it's actually not pre the change. It is the change. We've all seen it when we run a focus group with a bunch of people in a corporate environment. It's a form of corporate psychotherapy. It's extremely cathartic for people to have someone who empathizes with them, who is also an outsider, to just listen to what they say. And I've seen it, and I'm sure we all have. You see the lights go on when another colleague from a similar environment that they may not interact with has the same lived experience. And all of a sudden, just that, I think, allows people the space and gives them permission to go, great, to Justin's point, I may not even like this. I may think it's a silly idea, but it's becoming clear that it's going to happen regardless. So at least now I've processed some of the stuff. I've had a conversation. I've even heard myself say something. I've heard others say things. And now, if I had to use one word that I think is the absolute goal for any change, it's context, which Justin spoke about earlier. If you can create better context, then in the change world, I do think you've done your job.
Mm-hmm. So,
Yeah.
Justin, you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I wanted to. I know what you're reacting to. I think is this a notion of selling, right? And my reaction to that is I post all the time about this. We can't sell change, and we shouldn't try. You can't fundamentally sell a change that people don't understand, don't align to, don't have context for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think when I think about the marketing, when we talk about, we can't control change in the way we think we can. What we can do, though, is set the conditions in the system we're working in for change to emerge naturally. That's the future of change, is understanding that you asked earlier, what should we call it? I don't know, system architect, system player, system enabler. We're trying to change the context of the system over time so that new patterns can emerge naturally. And that's what marketing does on a grand scale. Like when you look at brand marketing and stuff like that, they change the narratives that people talk about and tell, and until eventually people, and I don't know if you follow sort of Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovations, sort of thinking that, in any social system, you get the innovators. And it's about 2.5 to 3% of any social system are going to gravitate towards things immediately. And then you get the early adopters, and then you get the rest, the early majority, late majority, and so on. I have a worksheet I built to help with this. I can share here if you like. Because the idea is to activate the system in a way, right, that you get natural momentum in the system. And that's how you spread change virally and at scale over time. Where this can go south is when, like for me, like I always cringe when a leader says, okay, change management's here, come and sell the change. And it's often, they literally will use those words, and it's often at the very last minute. So they haven't done the proper socialization and mindset sort of work over time. They've built this thing and developed it in private, and now they want you to come and sell it. And so you're literally out there. And it sort of implies a transaction and implies a little bit of manipulation, doesn't it? When you sell something, you want to exchange things, right? And so, but I think that when I think about marketing, when I think about all the best communications teams I've ever worked with, right, at scale, is that they create the conditions, they shift the narratives in the system. So that change starts to take root in a more natural way. And it enables what we're doing. So I do understand where you're coming with the selling thing. Um, but I also understand like the way when Kevin talks about shifting narratives at scale, that's how we get sort of grand change and grand strategy change at scale as well.
Okay, so talking about at scale, we have a question, and I think it fits in very nicely with this, is that how do you ensure the same result for change in an international organization where you're dealing with numerous languages and cultures?
Yes. Do you want to go, Justin?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So, we've done this across languages and cultures on numerous occasions, and I've always been quite stunned at how similar we are because we're human, right? So of course there are cultural nuances. There may well be language issues you want to be careful of and respectful of 100%. But even this work we've done in Saudi Arabia, you go in with, let me own it, I went in with a very stereotyped view of what I might find. What I found was absolute hospitality, most extreme kindness, extremely good English language proficiency, very high levels of education, and a huge openness to change. Same throughout Africa. Everywhere I've worked in Africa, when you get past these people are different, you just realize we're all the same in most respects. Of course, there are nuances, but I think nobody's expecting you to know everything. I think as a team or as an individual who's part of that process, if you're respectful, if you're curious, if you're also open about the fact that you don't know everything and you need, it's your frameworks perhaps, or your process, or sometimes it's an idea and it's their lived experience, their environmental understanding and expertise, then I think you start to get to a partnership where people see that you respect them. You're not trying to force something down their throats. And yeah, I have yet to find any dramatic cultural, language, gender kind of specific issue that's been a major blocker. And maybe I've just been lucky. But Justin, I'd be interested to hear your view as well.
Justin, I think you're on mute again.
Rookie move. Sorry, guys. The cultural sensitivity and stuff is and Kevin, you probably have. I've never worked in like Middle East and stuff. That would be a good example of a sort of a shift from in Canada to there, and it's a big shift. And how do you work there? I work a lot with organizations in South America and that kind of stuff, for example. So we know that you have to that cultural sensitivity and um, adapting to those is important. Like for example, I know that if I schedule a meeting for 2 o'clock in South America, I'm going to be sitting on the line till 2:30 when people walk in. It's just the culture, and you know what I mean. And I gotta plan for that and expect for that, etc. But one of the things, and I think if we really are honest with ourselves, we could all admit, and everybody on this call as well, is that the word that triggered me is guarantee. Nothing guarantees. Change is complex, right? And nothing can guarantee the right outcomes that you're looking for. So I often run a thought experiment with people. Imagine you're a change agent or a communication professional, and you launch a new big ERP or new system in your organization, and it's a huge success. And you're a change management / communication / marketing god in your organization. Everybody loves you. And then a competitor organization, say in Pretoria or whatever, contacts you and says, hey, we saw what you did. We're doing the same thing in our organization. We'd love you to come and do it. And by the way, here's a big fat contract. And you're about to sign the contract, and at the bottom it says, oh yeah, but you must guarantee the same change outcomes that you got in your organization and our organization. Otherwise, we fire you and we claw back 50% of what we paid you. Do you sign the contract?
Hell
Now
no.
I've run the no, hell no. I've run this thought experiment thousands of times worldwide, and not once has any change person or anybody said I will send a contract. And when we say, well, why? Why wouldn't you? It's the same technology, heck, it's the same industry, it's the same country, even. It could be in the same town, it doesn't matter. And people start to say things around like, well, people are different, the culture is different, and all that kind of stuff. And that's so true. And but the big lesson here is that there's only one word that we need to know and understand it is complexity, right? The interrelationness of the system, and that nothing can guarantee the same outcomes, right? We can do exactly the same thing. That's why change is not a rinse and repeat. We can have broad frameworks and that kind of stuff, but there's no way that Kevin's taking the exact same thing he did in Saudi Arabia into Johannesburg, right? And that's why change, when we hear a lot of things, this dogma in the change world about repeatable, structured, repeatable processes, blah blah blah, it's just not true. It ignores the complexities of the real world. So I'm just sort of attaching to that guarantee sort of statement, because we have to be honest with ourselves. We can't guarantee anything. We can show up and do our best work, and things can still go wrong. And that's happened to me many times in my career.
Absolutely. Which I guess, and I'm not in any way very competent in the lean, agile change space at all. But I think what we take a leaf from Justin's specific sort of expertise from is very much what he said, is we have a journey map, if you like, which we found to be useful over time. But we do say very specifically, the map is not the territory.
Mhm.
And into the territory, sometimes you actually have to throw the map away. Or on the map, it looks like it's a stream and it's actually a raging river. And yeah, you're actually going to have to find another way. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, I can't remember who said it, but it's one of my favorite quotes, which is, all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. So, to Justin's point, that dogmatic view that we only run change using ADCAR is also very limiting, because I think it's myopic and it doesn't take into account the complexity of the environment. And then finally, within that roadmap, we've got a whole list, a whole toolbox of prototypes of things that we've tried over time. And I have given up trying to predict which one's going to work where.
Yeah.
We do tactic A in an environment, and it absolutely takes root, and everyone thinks it's the coolest thing since sliced bread. And then in the next project, we put that in, and it's crickets. Like, my friend Paul Steenkamp, who's an innovation guru, says one must stay in love with the problem and not fall in love with one solution.
Mm.
And so for me, it's prototype, learn, get feedback, and then do more of what works and can the rest. Just because it's cool or it worked somewhere else does not mean that you have to marry it.
So Kevin, if I can state the obvious, if there's one person who should be able to change, it's the change manager.
No, that's actually quite a profound statement, Teresa, because I do think, and with the greatest of respect to my colleagues, some of the most dogmatic and inflexible people I know are people who call themselves change managers. They were taught something in 1983, and that is the way it's going to work forevermore, even if the evidence in front of you proves that that is no longer the case.
Agreed.
Yeah, if I can just share something on a personal note, I've had the issue with a client who said that if you are not ProSci certified and you can't implement it the way ProSci says you should, then you can't do this job. It's exactly that. I think they themselves didn't understand, what do you do to get people to go along with the new era? So on that note, I'd like to ask, most of us, and I think it's been mentioned in the conversation already, are pulled into a project where they're already halfway along. And now suddenly it's a case of, oh, we need someone to come and talk about this. We need a change manager. And you got any advice on how to approach a company and say, listen, when you start something new, you start with your change manager, comms manager, whatever you want to call them. You bring them in. How do we as consultants especially overcome that challenge?
I would say stop hoping for something that's never going to happen. Be grateful, because if they were that organized, they wouldn't be phoning consultants to help them when the shit hits the fan.
Yeah, it's true. You know, this is a common. I'm dropping little cards here from my hex exchange kit as Kevin's saying stuff like the map is not the journey. I posted one, the journey is the map. Actually, that's the narrative we want to get to, for example. And what you're describing is what I call, I have a card for this I'll share, is being parachuted into the project's last minute, right?
Mhm.
This is actually, I agree that look, you're not going to win that. We're not going to win that battle. It takes a lot of cultural change and changing the change culture over time. And so, what we need to be, my lesson for this, and what I teach people to do, is you need to be able to hit the ground running if you want to add value, because we don't. So, I explained earlier, one of my big frustrations. So, I'm probably about to open a can of worms here, but in my first gig, like I said, I went and got ProSci. They sent me to get ProSci certified. And I got these big tools and templates, and they looked really cool. They made a lot of sense at the time. And I came back into my organization and I could not make them work anywhere. In over 15 years of doing this, I'm not as mature as Kevin in this space. He's got a few years on me, but I've been doing it for 15 years. Um, I have not once been on a project where I've been able to go from start to finish following this perfect process on paper as described and trained. It just, the real world doesn't work like that. Things are shifting around us all the time. We're dropped at the last minute. So what's important, if you want to add value, you have to be able to hit the ground running. And this is where the sort of the lean and agile way of working makes sense. We're swapping out all those big mechanical documents for lightweight tools that we can engage people quickly, right? And dialogue and conversations and communication, and it's the only thing you can do. And when stuff hits the fan, if you come in with big templates and tools, you just turn people off right away. People have their day jobs, they're busy. You want to engage them in fun ways that their voice is heard and it makes sense, right? So a lot of this, and a lot what lean change is about, is removing the waste from our typical change processes so that we can enter those situations where that happens a lot. There's little time. You have to build context. You have to build sort of a movement and momentum quickly, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's start making this practical. Have you got any suggestions, or can you tell us about stuff that worked, that you actually did, a game you played or whatever, to get people on board quickly? A practical example.
Yeah, so I'm happy to take a stab at that, and I'm actually just going to share my screen so that I can show you all
And
a.
while Kevin is doing that, can I please tell everybody on the call, keep on watching the chat box, because Justin has been sharing a lot of really valuable stuff.
So let me share this. And as I said, all models are wrong. So my disclaimer out is this is not our tool, but it's one of the most simple, most profound tools I've personally found that you can use with a group of board members, or you can use with a group of contact center agents.
Kevin,
And
maybe you just want to make it full screen?
I have, maybe there's a bit of a
Oh,
lag. Um,
oh.
so is it coming full screen? No.
Mm-mm.
Anyway,
Okay, never
no,
mind. Go on.
I'll just kind of let you look at it. Basically, the three C's are clarity, capability, and commitment. And I'll unshare and then talk to the fact that what the model implies and why it works well in my personal experience is because, especially with executives, they like numbers, right? That's a huge generalization, but typically, if you rise to the top of a large listed organization, you're pretty numerate. And what the model then asks people to do is to say, in terms of how clear people are on this change that you're asking them to undergo, is it well communicated, and is there a clear story around that? Rate it from 0 to 10. People are usually able to rate that. We use this in a sort of one-on-one interview with particularly executives. The same with commitment. The commitment is not, are people committed to the company, but do they believe that the change you're asking them to make is culturally appropriate, right? So if you said we need to increase revenue, yes, so we're going to steal R1 off every client's bank account, right? People would not be committed to that change because it would be counter to the environmental culture. And then finally, capability is there enough money, time, resources, skills, people, and particularly, is there executive will to move friction and barriers out of the way of the change as it occurs, right? And the model implies that the chance of success in this particular environment, based on the scores you've just given as an executive, for example, imply what your chances of success are. Now, I always struggle with the arithmetic, so I'm going to reach for my calculator. But if you scored 7 times 7 times 7, you get to an answer of 343. And that is out of 1,000 if you're using the model, which implies you've got a 34% chance of succeeding if you believe that each of those dimensions is a 7 out of 10, which for me is really useful to show that executive you're talking to how hard you have to work to increase all of those simultaneously. The easiest and the one that we find we can help the best with is the clarity dimension, which is why we use stories. And I know Justin's a big believer in stories. And we're not talking about cutesy like fables. We're talking about simply put the change into a narrative structure. Like no one's going to listen to the facts and figures and tables and graphs. But if you can make it a story about humans who, in a context, who have a problem, they're all going to get together, they're going to help solve it, and the world's going to be better at the end of it in one way or another, then people are willing to see themselves in that story. The 3Cs model as well can be used in groups where you ask people, how do you score it? What would you do to improve clarity right now? And then you can do it in all combinations of that. And what it also helps is it creates a bit of a baseline, which is a number. And then you can remeasure it at another point in time, halfway, at the end. And I mean, we did a project where we showed, based on the people we'd interviewed up front's perceptions and the same people's perception at the end, where that number increased by 740%. And the outcomes of the change journey were obvious and visible, which included business performance, not just sort of little change metrics. So that would be one I could offer. It's super simple. It doesn't belong to us. We attribute it always. It's the European Learning Alliance, who was a group of leadership development consultants out of Europe who developed that 20 years ago. But it's simple. It has numbers attached to it. It drives a great conversation. And I'll hand over to Justin because what I love about his work, his philosophy, and all the tools he creates is that they are easy tools to have a conversation around. And I guess if there was another C to add to context, it would be conversation.
Yeah, like models, like that's the thing. Often we like to bang up on models, and we said all models are wrong, some are useful, but models are how people, we help people make sense of nebulous kind of topics and that kind of stuff. So there's value in all models if used in the right context. Even like ADKAR, it's a great sort of mental model to discuss. And I always like to talk about this from a mental model and an execution model, right? So we have mental models are a great way to help align our thinking and action, coordinated vision. Execution model is now executing the work. And the problem often is when we take a mental model and try to execute with it, it falls apart. Like if you try to take ADKAR and do a linear progression through it, like a lot of people do, it's not going to work because change doesn't work like that. I'll take a bit of a different because so I like how Kevin you talked about this is a great example of using this to get leadership and commitment there, and that's really important. I'll take it down a levels and maybe talk more at the practitioner level. I think that probably the the biggest thing that we can do is if you were going to do one practice, just one thing, and I always tell people in the courses tomorrow that would have an outsized impact on your change initiatives or it would be to work visually. Visualize your work, and whether that's storytelling, even building strategy, and how we manage a change. So, for example, in the chat box here is a picture of what I call a big visible change wall. And this would be sort of we ditch all of our big documentation and plans and SharePoint sites, and we come together as a team to manage the change all in one place. And from the strategy to the stakeholder mapping and that kind of stuff. And this sort of practice of working visually is something that I've started doing way back in 2010. Nowadays, I'm doing this sort of stuff on big visible walls. And it's a real shock to some organizations because they're used to seeing a PowerPoint deck, but instead I'm going to actually bring them into a virtual whiteboard and be like, here's what's going on. And people can connect immediately to it. So I'm a big fan of working visually and that visual working as well. You know, Kevin's been talking a lot about narrative and storytelling, hugely important. And you know, in terms of how we take a story. One of my favorite approaches is to use some of these tools. I know Kevin knows as well, like the Pixar storytelling format, right? And we use lightweight canvases to um, come together and build out a story. So in a recent last month, I ran a series of workshops and we used a tool, the storytelling canvas that was visual and using sticky notes. And it was sort of starts with in the past and we liked it because, but then one day and we need to make this change. We engaged people globally in these visual workshops where they put down their thoughts and ideas on sticky notes. We ran it all through AI and got the patterns. And then out of that, I created an infographic above. I've stripped away all the detail for the client's sake in the storytelling format, graphic above, but you can see the basic parts of the story. And then we drew it. It's a global mining company that we support. So I kind of made this mining motif and we drew it. And now we're sharing that as a one-page document globally that everybody can align around it, right? It's visual, it's intuitive. So visual working would be one of my big go-tos, is something that always works. It just always works.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
You've, if I may just pass on something, you've just given me a massive breakthrough, which is actually so obvious, but I'd never ever considered it before. And that is that you've got to be clear on what you're working with, whether it's a mental model or an execution model. And that is exactly why you get so frustrated when you're trying to use in the wrong context, right? So thank you. That was worth the whole conversation for.
We're worth the price of admission right there. Yeah, it's we often like we get in trouble when we try to execute with a mental model, right? They don't make good execution models. They're good mental models to provide direction and clarity, but at the execution level they fall apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
So separating those two is really important. Yeah. There was a question from Herman here. Do you want us to sort of address that one, Teresa?
Yes,
I don't know.
please.
I'll just, because I'm talking, so you know, you're asking when we get to the end of our project engagement with the client, what does a successful outcome look like for you personally? Well, I mean, the trite response here is would they hire you back, right? That's the from a consultant point of view, that's the easy one. Probably not very helpful because that's probably already something you know. Look, I realized something early in my career, and it had the biggest profound epiphany I ever had was that we don't control change outcomes. And this goes back to why the change management is such a wrong term. And we're working in complex systems. We're one player in this complex system where even if we do our best work, things often don't work out. And so once I would have said in the past, and some people would say, oh, well, if everything works awesome, there's adoption, utilization, and that kind of stuff, then good. Then good. But if I measured myself based on everything working out how we thought it was going to be, I would really not like myself as a professional. because it rarely ever does. My sort of benchmark, what was good for me is I believe that the value, the fundamental value in change management is to and communications is to create alignment, is any activity we do that creates context for stakeholders, nothing more, nothing less. We're trying to create alignment for change through shared context, through shared narratives. If if I can leave that client knowing that, and this has happened a lot, I did that job. Everybody shared context, everybody was aligned towards the direction, and yet it still failed because of things outside of my control. I no longer take that home with me. I leave that stuff at work, and I walk out with my head held high. That's my view. And being able to let go of that, detaching from those that, don't get me wrong, I want the outcome the client wants, right? And I work hard for it, and I know that. And because I know that about myself, I no longer get into the spiral of self-doubt and imposter syndrome thinking, how could it's not have worked out? Because you can look at the big four consultants, you can look at anybody, the McKinseys, the Accenture, whatever, they all fail all the time. And if you've ever worked with them in an organization, you know that as well. So take it easy on yourself, and so for me, that I create context and alignment. And if I can walk out saying that, I feel good about myself. Kevin, what?
Yeah, so for me, there are two things. The one which we always very pleased about is if the client looks like a hero, in inverted commas.
Yeah,
like that. And what we find is if we help a leader express themselves in a more human way and focus 90% of their effort on explaining why this is happening, then good things happen. And then everything that we do is just additive to that. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, might sound super cheesy, but with my gray hair now, I've realized it's actually the most important. And that is that you still want to go out for lunch with them. Because I'm not the hugest Simon Sinek fan. I think his content's good. I find him quite irritating, to be honest, and not appropriate to say. But I do find one of the things he says absolutely pivotal, and that is, don't work with people who want the service you're selling. Work with people who believe what you believe. And when we do that in a context where clients are aligned, I'm not saying we have to agree on everything, but broadly, philosophically, the worldview is similar. They're trying to do good stuff. Our purpose is do epic shit with cool people who care. And if we can do that, then we're winning at life, 100%. Yeah, thanks.
Right. So there's a practical question or an easy to answer question in the chat box. Where can I learn about the 3 Cs, the European Alliance? So maybe, Kevin, you can just either pop something in the chat box so that the answer is there for all to see. But I have one last burning question from my side, and that is the whole concept of, and I think it links back to how do you know that you've been successful? It's the whole concept of user acceptance testing. How do you know that the user has really accepted it and is not smiling but still using the old way or something like that? How do you test that the user has accepted the new way? Justin.
So in the change world, we often look at, this is where the metrics and the hard side of change management comes into place. Often it's the proofs in the pudding. You don't know what's going to happen until you take that shit live and you see what happens, right? That's just the reality, right? Everybody can be, everybody's like, yeah, this is good. Survey results look good. And the thing completely flops at go live because of things we couldn't anticipate and see. We try to get ahead of that, but sometimes it doesn't work. So we do look at things like adoption, utilization, proficiency, and we plan ahead. How can we know if the thing's actually being adopted? And if it's not, then we can look at some neat behavioral science techniques like the BJ Fogg behavior model that shows that for behavior to occur, 3 things need to happen at once: motivation, ability, and a prompt. And then we can say, okay, and then we can hypothesize what we think the problem is and run some experiments to get there. Those are what we call lagging indicators, though. You only know after go live if what's going on. The other thing we want, and we call those are metrics. The other thing we want to look at though is diagnostics. These are leading indicators that tell you you're heading in the right direction, hugely important. So keeping your finger on the pulse of the organization in advance of this thing is really a good practice. Now, surveys are really notoriously difficult and can be ineffective if not done well. I have found over the years that the only way to really understand the sentiment of the organization and what's going on is through narrative collection and sharing. And so we ask people to to tell a story about when, like for example, leading up, when in your work have you been frustrated by this and not, and that kind of stuff. And we ask them to tell stories about the change and that, and we collect those narratives at scale. And nowadays we can run those through AI for sentiment analysis and pattern recognition, right? That can give us some diagnostics. Because and you can do this in a survey form if you do an open-ended and you prompt a question and you ask them to tell a short story. So narratives, if you want to know what's actually going on in the organization underneath everything, it is the only way to really actually know is the narratives people tell about the work they're doing.
Mm. Mm. Kevin, you're deep in thought. You want to add something?
So I would add, most of the work we do relates to culture.
Mhm.
And the ask generally is, we're going through a transformation program and we need the culture to shift. And often that implies some kind of strategic shift as well, because so for us, everything Justin said. Secondly, maybe a lot more amorphously, you can feel it and you can hear it and you can smell it.
Mhm.
You really can. And so can the lead.
Yep.
It's very rare that when it works, I get an executive client saying, well, prove that it works.
Yep.
Because literally the conversation changes because the story has changed. The best projects do have bottom line business results. I mean, that same project I spoke of where there was a 740% improvement in the 3 Cs, they saved 74 million Rand in the first year.
Sure. I hope it was part of your contract to get some of that.
I'm not claiming it. It wasn't because of what we did, but they were able to see the sort of correlated business results. Because someone once famously said, and I love it and I often mention it, is what we don't want is a bunch of happy losers. Wanting to improve the culture to perform better and to be more productive, more engaged, not to be more.
Yeah.
If you do it all, that's great, right?
Yeah.
And then finally, for the work we do, you can almost always, and it is a lagging indicator, see it in specific sections of the culture survey or employee engagement survey. So we kind of we can't claim it directly, but almost always we can predict those 12 questions on your culture survey. If this kicks in and works well, you're going to see an improvement on those. But generally, you're gonna feel it.
Yeah, yeah. So just a final thought. Justin, I know that you've said work with pictures, paint, actually draw a picture if you have to. Kevin, what you've just mentioned about an executive bringing you in because they're going through a transformation and they want you to change the culture. I think the first thing you do is tell that executive to start talking English, because when you use those words, people think I'm going to lose my job. That's the first thing they think. And that's why that mentorship part of what you do is so important. Any last words from your side? Any suggestions? Any places people can look for more information? Something that you were burning to say at the beginning, but I never asked about it. Last words from you, please, Kevin.
Sure, yeah, I just hate last words. This has been such a great conversation.
Yeah, I hate stopping it.
I've been reminded about why I had a man crush on Justin. It's just been reignited. So hopefully
There you go, the truth comes out.
yeah, it's been fun. I think for me, it's always a good sign when, as the the presenters, we have a good time. I've learned a huge amount. And
Likewise.
thank you for the opportunity. It's been a really cool conversation. Went
Thanks,
very
Like,
Justin?
thanks. Yeah, Kevin, thanks, man. I respect the hell out of you and what you do. I talk about you often. Check out the Actuate group and my courses. I always talk about that. So I love what you do. And I guess I would say, look, just have fun with the work, man. You don't have to be stuck as a robot following process and tools. That's not what this work is about. Go connect with people, be bold. If you want to see change happen in your organizations, go do it differently. It starts with you. It really, really does. And if you can go and do something differently, you'll see people will follow you if you just have the courage to do it. So have fun.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And yeah, Justin, I don't know if you drink wine. Do
Sure
you?
do.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Because I'm
And
next year,
South African
October.
wine is one of my favorites, by the way.
There you
So
go. So
then
next year, October.
Liebenberg and yeah,
Next
bring me
October,
over.
when you come to our conference in Cape Town, we shall have a glass of with South Africa's best together. I'll be looking forward to that. And both of you, thank you so, so, so much for this afternoon. I cannot believe that an hour has gone by. I'm quite sure that everybody in the room will agree with me that we could have done this for another hour. Keep on asking the questions, listening to you. Just making frantic notes all over the place. Yes, so thank you everyone who joined. And Kevin, enjoy your evening. Justin, I hope you stay awake this day and that you are as productive as you would like to be. Thank you to the both of you.
awesome. Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you. Take care.
Yes.